Good evening, it's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the Prime Minister demands answers over the murder of Sara Sharif. The 10-year-old's father and stepmother were convicted yesterday, and a catalogue of failings has now emerged, which allowed Sara to be in her father's care, despite the authorities' concerns about him. Tonight, as a new report reveals, almost 500 children were killed or seriously harmed in the 12 months to March. We'll be discussing the horrifying scale of abuse and neglect in the UK and the challenge of keeping our children safe. Also ahead, a tidal wave of flu hitting England's hospitals. That's the warning from the NHS today. Experts say the health service could be pushed to crisis point, and it might be facing one of the worst winters in its entire history. Plus, on a collision course with local planners and environmentalists, the government unveils its controversial plan to use the Green Belt to solve the UK's housing shortage. And just what does make a Christmas classic? How the secret to success has changed. All that to come here on the UK Tonight. Good evening, thanks for joining us. Questions need to be answered about the murder of Sara Sharif, the Prime Minister said today. Although you'd be forgiven for thinking you've heard that many times before from our political leaders. Because also today, new figures show hundreds of children are dying or being harmed in England. Sara's father and stepmother were convicted yesterday, of course, and new details have since emerged about the catalogue of failings by the authorities that should have protected the 10-year-old. Surrey County Council's involvement with Sara's family began before she was even born, but despite 3 sets of family court proceedings, she was repeatedly returned to her parents' care. Sara's story is shocking, but sadly, it's not isolated. A new report has now found a scarcely believable 485 children died or were seriously harmed as a result of abuse or neglect in England in the 12 months to the end of March. Coming up, I'll be discussing the mistakes in Sara's case and the scale of that challenge that's facing social services to keep our kids safe. First, though, our social affairs correspondent, Becky Johnson, has more.
The danger to Sara Sharif of abuse from her parents was so serious that as a toddler she spent time in police protection. Social workers repeatedly raised serious concerns about the risk to Sara Sharif. They noted she was small, didn't eat a lot and would often stand facing a wall. 3 times the family courts were involved, yet she was returned to her father despite a string of abuse allegations against him. The detail emerging from Sara's past reveals a dysfunctional system that failed to protect her. Her name now added to a growing list of children who died despite the authorities being warned they were in danger.
This is about violence, it's about abuse, it's about making sure there's protection and safeguards for children, particularly those being homeschooled.
Sara had been removed from school 4 months before her death. A change to ban homeschooling for children at risk of abuse is being suggested. And fundamental flaws in safeguarding are being blamed, as a report reveals 485 children in England died or were seriously harmed by abuse or neglect in the year to March.
Decision-making, information sharing, information seeking is not happening in that really coherent, connecting way, so that people really know what's going on in a child's life or in their family's life, or things that have happened in the past.
With children's social care back in the spotlight, this frontline social worker has decided to speak out.
I think we're in a system that's broken. It's underfunded.
She says even when there are concerns about a child's safety, removing them from their family is far from straightforward.
The threshold for doing that is really high, and we have to ensure we've explored all other eventualities and plans before we can proceed to court.
Sara Sharif's school had wanted social workers to investigate, referring concerns about bruises on her face. But social workers in Surrey closed the case within days. This woman works for a different local authority.
I mean, how do you think they would be feeling now?
I can't imagine. That's one of my biggest fears in this job is is that being me?
Have you ever experienced a situation where a child has come to harm?
Not, I want to say not yet, and that's a horrible thing to say, but it is a worry. I think that's something every social worker is worried about.
The story of failure has become horrifyingly familiar. Promises that lessons will be learned are no longer enough. Instead, demands are growing for fundamental change so children don't die because no one stepped in to save them. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Becky joins me now. Becky, we were talking yesterday about the court case that culminated in the conviction of Sara's father and stepmother for her murder. But today, more of these details have come out about the whole case surrounding her life. And there are so many gaps.
So many gaps, and these documents that are emerging paint a picture of an entire system that failed Sara. You know, so often we talk about failings of social services or social workers being blamed for making decisions incorrectly, but the documents coming out of the family court show actually there were, throughout Sara's life, social workers who were flagging really serious concerns about Sara, and they did so in the family court at times when, you know, they were trying to get Sara to a point of safety, but those court hearings would ultimately end up with Sara being placed in the custody of her father. We've also learned that as a youngster, not only was Sara in foster care for a short time, she was also in police protection. The police were aware of the allegations against her parents. So these were lots of different agencies, all who have a responsibility for keeping children safe, all aware, but somehow just not working together. Now, you heard the social worker in my report saying how difficult it is for social workers to remove children from their families. And, you know, that is for good reason. There is research that shows that most children are better off with their own families. But of course, there are cases where that is not the right environment for a child. And I think that social worker feels that the whole system needs looking at, because there needs to be an easier mechanism when those serious concerns are raised by social workers for getting a child away from an abusive family. But then we hear this report today, over 400 children abused and neglected, either dying or suffering serious harm in 1 year in England. This is something that is widespread, it is nationwide. And again, the explanation given by the author of that report is that agencies simply aren't talking to each other. They're not sharing information. It almost beggars belief, as an outsider looking into the system, that there isn't just some centralised database where a child's name can be typed in and their history and warning signs and red flags come up, but there doesn't appear to be. And I think that seems to be, experts say, one of the reasons why we keep seeing children very sadly slip through the net.
Yes, Becky, it was a point that was made last night to me, and we'll put it to our guests right now. Thanks for the time being. As I say, joining me now is Dr. Kieran Murphy from the Association of Child Protection Professionals and family law specialist Lucy Reid KC. Good evening to you both. Listen, this is how I'd like to talk about it. We'll talk about Sara's case. We'll talk about the broader situation right now, both legally and in social services, and then talk about what you'd like to see change, because clearly things have to change. But Lucy, I'm going to come to you first on the legal situation with Sara. The case was heard 3 times, apparently, and yet she still ended up back in the apparent care of her father, who ended up murdering her. How have the courts failed here?
That's certainly a legitimate question to ask, given the information that we now have. But I don't think at the moment it's possible to answer that question. We've got little bits of information coming out now, and I understand there are some court documents that are likely to be released in due course. I've not seen any of those documents. Certainly, when one looks at the basic chronology, that there were 3 different sets of court proceedings, some of them involving the local authority, and then latterly proceedings, I think, between the parents, but without the local authority being directly involved. Of course, anyone is going to ask the question, how did this happen? But what we don't know is what the information was that the court had. Very probably it will have had some of the information about the known risks, but we don't know if the court had all of it. And we don't know how that risk was assessed. either by social services, who may have had some input in making recommendations in 2019, or by CAFCAS, which is the court social work organisation that also makes recommendations in those sorts of cases. They might or might not have made recommendations that aligned with the judge's ultimate decision. I don't know. And we don't have yet the judge's ruling setting out their reasons for making that decision. So it's quite difficult at the moment to answer the question, but it's perfectly understandable that people would want to know and would be scratching their heads and saying, how could this happen?
Lucy, one thing we don't know is who the judge was. Is that unusual for us not to know at this point who the judge was in this case or these cases?
I think probably not at this stage. Generally, if a judgment is published in a case, the judge's name will be on it. But very many cases are heard in the family court and the judgment isn't published for one reason or another. In this case, because of what has subsequently happened, there's been a request for the judgments to be released to the media, and they may well be published. But as I understand it, the name of the judge can't yet be released. And that's probably because the criminal process has been ongoing. There will be a safeguarding review that will take place. And that safeguarding review will try and draw together all of the information about what was happening with social services, the police, the courts, or all of the agencies that were involved and had eyes on this family. And draw some conclusions. And I suspect, but I don't know because I haven't been involved until today, that's just a safeguard that's in place in the interim.
Kieran, social services were aware of this family for longer than Sara's whole life, from before she was born until, sadly, the day she died. She'd already been in foster care once as well. How on earth did it get to the stage that she could be taken out of school, homeschooled apparently by her father, and not trigger the kind of alerts that would have kept her safe?
I think that's a really important question, Matt. I think there's three key elements that we will scrutinise retrospectively here. Three key decisions. One, you and Lucy have discussed already. It was the decision of the family court to place Sara in the care of an individual who had an established history of physical violence against partners and children. And I think the second one is the decision by Children's Services to close the case after 6 days. Again, we don't know the rationale there, but we'd like to know. And the third one is, and this is the one I'm very curious about, what was communicated between services? I'm thinking about what Annie Hudson said in Becky's introduction there to the report. What was the communication between services once Sara was pulled out of school? Because for me, it's a serious red flag. If we haven't learned anything from the high-profile cases of the lockdowns, Arthur Labinji, Hugh Hobbs and Finlay Bowden, we know that when children become less visible, that is a strategy that abusers use to conceal their abuse. So the fact that she was pulled out of school after an allegation of physical abuse that was investigated, I'm curious to see what the communication and reaction to that was afterwards. And I think that's another really important question that we have to answer.
A sensitive one as well is she also suddenly started wearing religious dress, a hijab.
Yeah.
Now, are there too many cultural sensitivities amongst social workers that they, and I know you think they're not curious enough, that seems to be a thing that keeps cropping up, but you think they're being too culturally sensitive in not looking what is underneath that head covering?
What I'd say about that, Matt, is it's really important as a social worker that we adopt an anti-discriminatory and anti-racist approach to our practice. Really, really important. However, historically, we know high-profile cases, Victoria Climbié being one, the Rochdale CSE scandal being another, practitioners, professionals, more than social workers, haven't asked those politely sceptical, probing questions, sometimes because of a fear of being conceived as racist. And I think that's really important. We have to adopt anti-racist, anti-discriminatory practice. But we also need to be asking those searching questions about when there's been an allegation of physical abuse and ostensibly some injuries, why all of a sudden a child starts wearing different clothing. In combination with being then pulled out of school, all of those things retrospectively add up to say it feels as if something is being concealed here. So yeah, we call it polite skepticism, respectful uncertainty, asking those probing questions. They're really important. And a fear of being perceived as racist, shouldn't get in the way of protecting children.
Let's talk about some of the wider issues. I mean, you said there, Kieran, that not an awful lot has changed since the deaths of some children during lockdown. It seems like not a lot has changed since Victoria Clambier's death prompted the Children's Act of 2004. One thing did happen, though, and that was called Contact Point. But that was abolished when the Conservative Lib Dem coalition government came back in 2010. A lot of people who were watching the coverage yesterday mentioned that. That was meant to be about data sharing. Now, there were issues around invasions of privacy and that kind of thing, which is why I think the government at the time got rid of it. But could that, or a better version of that, have made a big difference in the past 14 years?
I was a big fan of Contact Point when it was recommended, Matt. I'm glad you mentioned it. Privacy concerns were the barrier to Contact Point being rolled out around the country, and they were the reason why it was jettisoned ultimately, including from high-profile celebrities, I should say, spoke up against it for reasons of wanting to maintain privacy, which we must respect. However, what we need to start saying here is that, child protection concerns actually need to supersede everything in this society when it comes to, privacy, data protection and information sharing. And so I'm glad that we're revisiting the idea of Contact Point, because I do think it's a really important idea. If a practitioner could log on to a system and get all of the child protection safeguarding information about that child is more likely to be protected. And I think on balance, that's really important. And Matt, I just want to say, it's more than 2004 Victoria Climbié. The theme of poor information sharing, poor multi-agency working goes back 50 years to the 1974 report into the death of Maria Colwell and the formation of England's child protection system. So we do need a different way of approaching it. And I think Contact Point, or some iteration of that, where agencies can get easy access to information about children in the name of protecting them, is justifiable.
Lucy, Sara's case is unique in many aspects, not least the fact that she was left. Her father, stepmother, ran off to Pakistan and eventually came back. But unfortunately, in terms of those numbers we've seen today, nearly 500 children in the year to March being killed or harmed in a place they should be safe. At the same time, we hear about courts' backlogs being huge. I mean, are we missing lessons here because the system is so slow to get through this situation and also not joined up enough?
I think in terms of slowness, where social services bring an urgent issue to the court door, so for example, in Sara's and her siblings' case, there were urgent applications made to the court. The court will hear those applications. It will prioritise those. And barristers like me up and down the country will get emails saying, there's going to be a hearing this afternoon, there's an urgent case coming in, can you cover it? Courts prioritise that. So I don't think that specific issue, when a new case comes in and there's an urgent issue, is a particular difficulty. But you're right that the family court and most of the agencies it relies on and works with, social services, CAFCAS, are hugely strained in terms of resource, personnel, workload. So there is a huge demand on the time of judges, court staff, social workers, etc.
Lucy, does that stop them adequately communicating with each other? I mean, we've talked about data sharing, but just talking to these bodies talking between themselves and aligning on what the problem is in front of them?
There are a range of different information sharing processes that go on. There is a lot of sharing between agencies. In my view, probably where things may fall down is what people do with that information once it's made available, the time they have to analyse it, and to appreciate the significant points and join up the dots. Within a family court case, CAFCAS will be one of the agencies who will gather safeguarding information, prior convictions, concerns about police involvement, information about prior social services involvement. And they will gather that and they will produce a report for the court at the start of a private law case, the sort of case that happened in 2019. So the judge will have that pulled together in summary, at least at the start of a case.
Kieran, let me come back to you. Sorry to Lucy, we haven't got an awful lot of time, sadly, because it's such a huge issue to discuss. Kieran, I know you lecture in social care as well. Inevitably, you're speaking to people who might want to go on to be social workers or not, as the case may be. I mean, I imagine the coverage around this is going to be paralysing for some people working in social care right now, and it's going to be pretty off-putting for those who might have considered it as a career.
I think it's a really important point, Matt, and I think there's a real responsibility on how we report these cases. And I think something I'd like to highlight is that despite what we're hearing at the moment about this tragic case that we rightly scrutinise, the English child protection system, research has shown time and time again, is one of the most effective in the world. We can't report on the successful cases because of privacy law. But what I do want to say is that we have chronic workforce instability within the child protection system at the moment. 18% agency locum rates, 22% vacancy rates. And something that my research says is contributing to that is how the role is depicted nationally, especially after high-profile child protection deaths. And, you know, there are huge caseloads, which I think is something that's getting in the way of communication, by the way, having to prioritise when there's so much demand for your time. And I would say that the average child protection social worker now, after 3 years or 2 years of working hard to qualify as a social worker, leaves practice on average within the first year now, Matt, and that is a problem that we need to address.
Yes, look, just finally, inevitably, there are questions around money. I think the last recommendation was 2.6 billion needs to be spent on this area. And what's it got instead, Kieran?
Well, the Conservative administration offered 200 million, which is less than 8%. Labour have offered 250 million, less than 10%. It's a drop in the ocean.
Are you hopeful, just to finish off, that Keir Starmer saying questions need to be answered, saying that protecting children is a priority for this government, that could change?
Matt, I think what I would say is that I'm hopeful that they're the right noises, but it is about time after 50 years of those noises to see the action. And we've commissioned a national review, a quotes unquotes, once in a generation review of children's social care that says 2.6 billion is the minimum we need to get it back to a level of safe operation, not optimal operation, safe operation. So it's time for action, and it's time for monetary investment in the most emotionally precious individuals in our society.
Yes, and when you see that smiling photo of Sara, it really does hit home that things clearly, according to you both, need to change. Kieran and Lucy, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. The NHS warns of what they're calling a tidal wave of flu hitting our hospitals. We'll get the latest with our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi. Also, the government insists it's not waging war on rural England as it outlines an overhaul of the planning laws.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Very
Nice
much,
to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me, they intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. Now, brace yourselves, because the NHS says a tidal wave of flu has caused a 70% increase in hospital cases in England in just 7 days, with health leaders urging all eligible people to get vaccinated as soon as they possibly can. It comes after A&Es had their busiest November on record, with 2.3 million patients coming through their doors. Experts say the health service could be heading for one of its worst winters ever, as Laura Bundock explains.
Hi, this is Adam, one of the medical secretaries at Esther.
The pressure inside wards this winter is unrelenting. At Whipps Cross Hospital, flu cases are soaring.
Things are busier than normal. We had a very busy winter last year, but this year the numbers already suggest that we are over capacity.
This is where the most severe respiratory cases are treated.
Several of these patients have got multiple problems. The flu that we're seeing is making these patients more sick and taking them longer time to recover.
They've 16 beds, but could fill them 3 times over. Penny's being discharged after 10 days.
Oh, you can just see they're overrun. Yeah, constantly, on the go, all night, all day.
Hi, Susan. Hi.
Susan's desperate to leave. Her infections left her struggling to breathe.
There are so many people getting older and needing far more help, such as me. I didn't realise I was 75. I fell down and then I realised I was 75. Out there's a swarm of people longing for a bed. At the moment, I see myself as a bed blocker because I'm ready to go home today.
In A&E, trolleys tailgate along corridors. This is so common, they've added curtains to the ceiling for patient privacy.
It is difficult. We don't want patients to be waiting hours and hours on trolleys, especially our frail and vulnerable patients. We want to be able to see them in a timely way. We want to be able to, if they need admission, admit them to a hospital bed in a timely way without them having those long waits.
The tidal wave of flu and seasonal viruses is hitting hard. They're not overwhelmed here, but warn there's worse to come this winter. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Whipps Cross Hospital in East London.
Layla Hanbeck from the Independent Pharmacies Association joins me now. Good evening to you, Layla. And you're here because pharmacists can do their bit. You don't have to go to a doctor to get a jab, do you?
Yes, of course. So pharmacists are jabbing for flu vaccines and also COVID vaccination. They're offering that as well. But this year, compared to previous years, we've been advised by NHS authorities to start a month later. So previous years, we used to start in September to offer flu jabs, but this year we were advised to offer it in October. So by this time of the year, a group of pharmacists that would deliver 20,000 doses have delivered 16,000 doses, so 4,000 doses less than previous years. So there are less people being vaccinated by this time of the year.
Why were you advised to wait a bit longer?
It wasn't advised by JCVI in terms of for healthcare professionals to start the flu season, vaccination season later this year. So essentially, also the advertising for it and all of that started also later. So the awareness and the lateness of it have no doubt impacted. But we're also seeing some vaccine apathy amongst people as well. And it goes to show that there needs to be much better awareness out there with regards to the importance of getting the flu jabs.
Yes, well, look, let's not revisit that whole vaccine discussion, which clearly was pretty prevalent during COVID. The advice to people is, if they can get a vaccine, get a vaccine. I mean, there are certain groups, of course, that still get, for example, a COVID jab on the NHS. But what about other people who might want to get that? The last time I looked, it's £100 to get a private COVID vaccine. That's pretty expensive.
Well, I mean, people who are not eligible to get it on the NHS can ask their local pharmacies, and they can get it privately. I'm not aware of how much each pharmacy offers as part of the prices. So it's important to have that discussion with the local pharmacy to see, the benefit.
It's £100. It's £100 in a lot of places. I've had a look. That's expensive.
But I think it's the benefits sometimes are really great when you get the jab, because research has demonstrated that you have a 50% chance of saving yourself against the flu if you get the jab. So have that discussion with the healthcare professional to see the benefits.
Look, it's not just flu and COVID. I mean, it's being described as a quad-demic because of the norovirus and RSV as well. You mentioned vaccine apathy. I'm going to share with you a different kind of apathy. Since the COVID pandemic passed, people aren't washing their hands like they used to. They're touching their faces. They are ignoring those rules that we all got used to about keeping distances. Do you think that's playing its part?
Well, washing hands, definitely. And, we are... we are traveling to work and, sitting in trains and, hanging out with other people and so on. So it's important, obviously, particularly during the winter season when these viruses thrive, to be much more vigilant in terms of like washing hands and making sure that you protect yourself. Another thing that I want to highlight as well is that, protecting your immune system by, for example, taking vitamin D supplements is something to think about, which helps the immune system, boost the immune system, particularly when we don't get much sunshine these days. So important to read up about this and also speak to healthcare professionals to see how we can boost our immune system during this very difficult season when all of these viruses are really thriving.
Layla, appreciate the advice. Thanks for your time. Still to come here on the UK Tonight, the government is accused of waging war on rural England as it unveils its plans to use Greenbelt land to solve the housing crisis. Plus, as if you haven't heard them enough already, we will take a look at exactly what makes a Christmas classic. Now, we probably knew it was coming, but the government has put itself on a collision course with local authorities and environmentalists as it unveiled its plans to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years. The Prime Minister says providing homes for people takes priority over nature and the environment, but the Conservatives say the government is waging war on rural England. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this.
Civil engineering. The Prime Minister and his deputy with a blueprint to fix Britain's broken housing market. 1.5 million new homes in this Parliament. That's 370,000 a year. And every council in England must help.
Hello.
A massive promise of future home ownership and deadlines already on the Prime Minister's mind.
How long does it take to finish your apprenticeship for carpentry?
This one's 18 months.
A visit to a housing development in Cambridgeshire. It's areas like this, between two towns, soon to be top of the queue for planning permission.
Well, I've got 1.5 million homes being built.
The Prime Minister says he'll stop the blockers, all to help people like Cassie to settle down.
How's it feel to have your own place?
Amazing.
Labour's plan to reclassify bits of the green belt into a new developer-friendly grey belt will speed up house building. But when I caught up later with Cassie, who understands the benefits, even she had questions.
When you hear about sort of new building estates being built, one of the biggest things is always, everyone signing petitions of don't build here, things like that. It just needs to be looked into exactly why that is. Why is it that people don't want the houses?
It's 50 years since the last house building revolution in the 60s and 70s, back then driven by new tower blocks and council housing. Fast forward to now, private developers fund the work and house building is on a downward trend, and so far from the target set today.
Welcome to Keir Starmer's vision of the future. Show homes like this one, replicated thousands of times on this construction site and all around the country. I was talking to the boss of this construction site who said today was a great start, but there was so much more the government needed to do. Will they now take on some of those environment and nature and habitat rules that developers complain about? And if they do, could they end up in breach of their manifesto?
Of course we want to get the balance right with nature and the environment, but if it comes to a human being wanting to have a house for them and their family, that has to be the top priority.
Conservationists are concerned at the Prime Minister's tone. Could he abandon other promises to get Britain building?
Labour was really clear in its manifesto that it's going to meet the targets in the Environment Act, and the top first target in the Environment Act is to halt the decline of wildlife by 2030. That's really, really difficult. They will not meet the target if they approach growth by ripping up really important protections for wildlife and for our natural environment.
The clearest of targets, but hard to see how they get there without picking big fights. Fixing the foundations, but will Keir Starmer be the one to actually finish the job?
Environmental campaigner and member of the Green Party, Carol Gotham, joins me now from Kent, I think. Carol, would you describe yourself as a NIMBY?
I think NIMBY is a pejorative term, so no, I wouldn't describe it.
I'm not using it as that, but it stands for not in my backyard, so you know what I mean.
Yes, I'd rather see it used for nature in my backyard myself.
Tell me why.
So we are in the middle of a housing crisis. Now, people keep hearing these words, housing crisis, bit of a soundbite. What it really means is that youngsters cannot afford to get mortgages. They cannot afford the houses that are there. And so we actually have an affordability crisis. The crisis in housing is not in how much housing we've got. We've got 700,000 empty houses across the country. We've also got room on brownfield land for 1.2 million houses to be built. We've got room for nature and we've got room for people without even having to build on another part of the green belt, without having to build on green fields.
But why I asked if you're a NIMBY is because where you live in Kent, you're leading this campaign against a housing development that I think the local council weren't going to pass. And then the government said, no, this needs to be built.
Yes, yeah, quite true. The planning officers had recommended against this 8,400 housing development in the middle of the countryside, not sustainable from a transport point of view. Also, just an outline planning application, so no detail in there at all about what sort of houses they were going to build. And the usual developer promises that everyone across the country sees, you know, we will build healthcare facilities, we will build schools, we will build roads, etc. But really, these are empty promises that the developers cannot fulfil.
I mean, are you sure about that? They would say they probably could fulfil those, wouldn't they?
Time and again, we've seen that they haven't been able to fulfil them. Time and again, we've seen, even with the full planning applications, that they claim that, for instance, they cannot afford to build the houses that we really do need in the housing crisis, which are houses for affordable rent or social rent. So that's the housing crisis in a nutshell, is the one of affordability. All the people in bed and breakfast cannot afford to buy a house. They need social housing to rent.
You've lived there your whole life, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes, I have, yeah.
What's your house like?
Mine is an ex-council house. It's a semi-detached house. It's got farmland at the back of it.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky I live on the outskirts of the town. But this town, Faversham, where I live, is being ringed by new developments. We've had 1,800 houses given planning permission. And the trouble with the planning system is that Labour says that they want to keep putting an emphasis on building houses.
Yeah.
But across Kent...
They're not the only ones, Carol, are they? They're not the. I mean, the Tories said that previously. They didn't quite live up to their promises. Your own Green Party has said it would build new houses too. Yes, it would try and refurbish some, perhaps requisition them. I don't know, because, like you say, there's a lot of empty properties. Although people don't have to fill their properties with people. I mean, people do invest in property and just leave it sat there, which people have a view on, of course. But most of the main parties, the Greens included, would build some new houses. So they've got to go somewhere.
But do we need new houses? I've said, you know, as I've said, we haven't got a stock problem. The problem is that we have people invest in houses and they leave them empty. So we've got 700,000 empty properties, truly vacant properties across the country. We've got brownfield where we could build another 1.2 million houses. What we don't need to do is we don't need to encroach on the green spaces. We don't need to build on agricultural land because we have got enough extant planning permissions as well. You know, in Kent,
Labour's argument, Carol, is the green belt is not all green. In fact, they're talking things like, you know, old petrol stations and car parks that are unused. And I know the development in your area, that they've said that can't really be agricultural land because of the knock-on effects of runoff and all that kind of thing. I mean, you can see where I'm getting at. Listen, what I'd like to talk about is just the bigger picture, because, look, you and I are no spring chickens. But for us to enjoy our old age, we need younger people living around us and working and paying their taxes. And if they can't afford to live around us, then, well, what happens next?
Well, exactly. I'm in that position here myself. You know, we've got 3 children. They're all adults. They're all living with us. They cannot afford a mortgage. There's no social housing to rent. It would be useless for them to put themselves on the waiting list because they've got a roof over their head. But the houses that are being built are not for them. They're not affordable, especially in this part of Kent. We're too close to London. The house prices are enormously high. You need 9 times the salary to get a mortgage here. So that even the houses that are being built are not for local people. And 27,000 houses have got planning permission to be built in Kent, but have not been built out. And there's 1 million of those over the whole country. If Labour really want to get to grips with the housing crisis, then they should make the developers build out those houses. There's 1 million straight off.
Carol, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Coming up here on the UK Tonight. news of pay increases for players in next year's 100 cricket competition. Not everyone's happy about it. Plus, oh, I haven't heard that one recently. Anyway, what makes a Christmas cracker? We'll be looking at how the secret to success of these songs has changed over the decades.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No, no, no.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News.
I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
Are you diminished by claims that you're a racist?
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Today in Manchester, there is nothing quite like it. Blue and red lock horns. Sports most compelling soap opera.
The Manchester Derby on USA.
Welcome back. Coming up, we'll take a look at exactly what makes a Christmas number one. Dave's just putting the finishing touches to his sports script there with his pen.
Little doodle. Something.
Little doodle,
Yeah,
okay. We're going to talk about cricket. The 100 cricket competition has announced pay increases for all players, but not everyone's happy about this. Why?
Yeah, this is the classic case of two sides to the same story, right? So what the 100 organisers have said, there is an average increase overall of 25% across all salary bands. So the bands between band 1, band 7. So band 1 are the highest paid players. So for the men, they go from £125,000 to £200,000. That's
not bad.
60% increase. That's a nice little hike, isn't it?
Yeah.
For the women, they go from £50,000 to £65,000. So
not the same.
Not the same. And in fact, now, if you compare those new earnings, well, the men will be earning just over 3 times the same amount as the women for playing essentially in the same competition. However, it's not just the gender pay back. That's also incredibly important, but it's more just that it's top-loaded. So the overall 25% average increase is much more to do with the top players than it is those in band 3, band 4, band 5, band 6, and that's caused a fair bit of concern. And the organisers, for their part, they say it's a step forward. It's not the end of their journey. They're now able to offer 4 times the amount of money and earnings than they did in the first year of the women's competition. But the PCA, so that's the Professional Cricket Association, that's the union for the players, they criticised the lack of consultation in terms of the new salaries, negligible change for all but the top players, extremely concerned at the disproportionate salary band, so very few men's professional cricketers actually benefit. The gap between the highest paid men's and women's players has widened, as you say. So that's according to their chief exec, Daryl Mitchell. But also the players have started commenting on this. And Sam Billings, who will be one of the higher paid players, but he's the Oval Invincibles captain, he said, remarkable how a category gets a 60% increase, yet most others get under 5%. Who has come up with this? So what they're saying is, the organisers are saying, this is part of the evolution of the game. Ultimately, they want to achieve a little bit more parity, but there are obviously concerns about
with 5-day, 4-day, 1-day, 2020, 100, it seems like cricket is in a constant state of flux in the evolution, and who do you follow and who gets paid what, and it just seems overly complicated.
Yes, and this doesn't necessarily help that picture either, but yes, this is what they're trying to do with the 100 as of 2025, with the campaign starting next summer. OK, plenty more to come, including European football tonight.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I think there's a human quality that some people are destined with their own determination.
I think that the player, compared to me, I think that they have much more responsibility.
I do think there's a responsibility within the game to prepare the lads for how hard it's going to be.
I started my investigation into academy football by finding out how the game's top managers get the best out of the young players. But only 9% of our academy players will ever play a professional game. Coming up in this episode, we find out how the best become the best.
You don't just get it handed to you, you're aware.
There has to be a fallback.
Chelsea Academy, that's all I've known.
Mentally, I think I've always been quite strong.
In the history of the game, almost 1,300 people have had the ultimate honour of wearing an England shirt. They climbed the mountain, made it to the very top. So what does that journey look like? The journey to become an elite footballer?
It's just what I love doing. It's the only thing that I loved growing up. There was no alternative for me.
You got the big break at the age of 6.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary story.
I was just...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, what's your favourite Christmas song? It's hard to choose, isn't it? Whether you're humming Jingle Bells or singing along to Fairy Tale of New York, I still love that one. Can't get enough of it. And Christmas is really big business when it comes to those songs. What exactly, though, is the magic formula to creating a Christmas cracker? Wouldn't you love to know? Well, our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, has been on a mission to decipher the science behind those festive sounds.
I don't want a lot for Christmas.
We all know the words, but there are some Christmas songs best left to professionals like Laura O'Connell.
The Christmas tree.
Mariah Carey's classic festive track soon to hit 2 billion streams as it marks its 30th anniversary. Try to avoid them all you like, but at this time of year there is no escaping the lights of Wizard.
So here it is, Merry Christmas.
And Slade, Noddy Holder jokingly referring to this as his pension plan, because a successful Christmas song can sustain a songwriter for a lifetime.
It is, if you like, the Christmas gift that keeps on giving. But from a music production side of things, you can cynically lob as many sleigh bells and Santa references at a song all you like, but that doesn't guarantee a festive hit. What's going on in the wider world seemingly coming into play much more than you'd think.
Your faith was strong, but you needed proof.
This was Christmas #1 during the 2008 financial crash.
Beauty and the moonlight overthrew ya.
While it's difficult to definitively link economic conditions to musical trends, it's interesting to note their correlations. According to Sky News analysis, times of economic hardship have often coincided with more sombre Christmas hits.
Won't you stay another day?
Stay Another Day by East 17 also turns 30 this year.
Stay now, stay now, stay another day now.
From Tony Mortimer, a rare piano performance with students for Nordhoff and Robbins, the UK's largest music therapy charity.
It is a time of reflection, looking back over the year, you're coming to the end of it. And it's about an end, so I think it fits well with Christmas.
You've got the bells, for example.
Laura O'Connell, senior pianist at Piano Works, can play them all. The ones we know and love hook you in within the first few bars.
It's just sort of honing in on what is going on around the world and like bringing people together with the music and with the songs.
All the boys of the New York Police Choir were singing Galway Bay, and the bells were ringing out for Christmas Day.
United less by the jolly holiday songs, but more often than not, the ones which trigger a sentimental response. Our attraction to poignant party music, perhaps more accurately reflecting the emotional rollercoaster that is Christmas. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Wish it could be Christmas every day.
Sadly, no mention of my favourite festive number one, Rage Against the Machine. Gets me all Christmassy. Time for a look at the weather now, and tomorrow looks fairly settled, if chilly and cloudy for many, but the weekend will bring some changes. It'll be mostly overcast this evening, with low cloud and drizzly rain for parts of England, Wales and the southwest of Ireland. Cloud will remain quite extensive tonight, with some hill fog and sporadic outbreaks of light rain. So if you're heading home from the Christmas party, take a brolly. That's all from the UK tonight. You can catch up on all the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code on screen. I'll be back Monday, 8 o'clock. It is The World Next. Bye for now.